What's up, everybody? Today I'm doing my July reading wrap up. So it's been a while since I've done one of these. I think the last one I did was like 2 or 3 months ago, maybe. It was sometime in the spring when I did this. And I read a lot of books this month, so I just decided to do another wrap up video and kind of cover everything that I read and do reviews on these. I am going to be doing kind of brief reviews for some of these books because there's a lot here, and I don't want this video to be like an hour long. So, yeah, let's just kind of get started here. These first books I'm going to show you are ones I'm not going to go too in depth on. I have individual reviews up for these books already, as well as a couple of other books I have in this stack here. But yeah, these books are The American Chillers. I read 3 of these this month, or 2 of these and then one of the Michigan Chillers, my bad. And these books were a big part of my childhood. I love the American Chillers books, and I decided to revisit them, and I really enjoyed this one still. This one brought back a lot of memories, a lot of that nostalgia, and I had a fun time with it. But unfortunately, I've discovered that these books don't age as well. They're nothing compared to the Goosebumps series, and the writing is just not the best. So these American Chillers books, I'm not showing all of them, all of the ones that I've read here. Just I have one book from each of these series. But yeah, this was my favorite one. If you do want to check out any of the American Chillers books, I would probably recommend this one. I believe this is the best one out of the entire series. Again, I didn't go through and reread like all of the ones I had, just a few of them. And this one was my favorite. The other ones just did not age as well, and they weren't really as good. So yeah, American Chillers, Florida Fog Phantoms. I also went through and read the Shivers series, or a few of the books, not the whole series, obviously. And out of all of the ones that I read, which was 4 of them, this was definitely my favorite. But this is not really a kid's book. Again, I have an individual review up for these Shivers books if you guys want to go check that out. But yeah, this one was really shocked me. This book is really edgy. There's a lot of adult themes in here. It's a very dark, like kind of mature story. But again, overall with these Shivers books, I'm not impressed with the writing style at all. It's very flat. These stories don't really have a whole lot to offer, and I just was not impressed by these at all. I did read a couple of these when I was younger, but I didn't really remember them, and I just wanted to go through and read them again. As you guys know, I like to read children's literature and young adult and all that kind of stuff too, so I'm a huge Goosebumps fan, so I just decided to visit these Shivers books and see how they were, and I was pretty disappointed, but out of all of them, this one was definitely my favorite. And then lastly, I also went through and read some of the Most Wanted books and did reviews for these, which I have up on my channel if you guys want to go watch those. And out of the ones I read this month, this one was my favorite, but I was not particularly happy with any of them, to be completely honest. These newer Goosebumps books just aren't the same, and the Most Wanted series as a whole has kind of let me down. But I still had some fun with it overall, and this one was probably the one I enjoyed the most out of the few that I read. So if you're looking to check out something from the Most Wanted series, I don't know, maybe give this one a shot. This one has really cool artwork too. I like the artwork on this one, even though it's a bit misleading. There's no zombie Frankenstein monster dog in this book, unfortunately, but yeah. So that's it for those. I'm not going to go too in-depth on those books. I have videos up, like I said, for those, if you guys want to go check them out. Let me set these aside. All right, now let's get into all of the novels that I read this month, and we have 8 of them here. So yeah, I read quite a bit this month on top of the children's horror that I read. I believe that's like 17 or 18 books. So all right, let's get started. And I'm going from least favorite to favorite here. So first, we're going to start off with a DNF. Now, if you guys know me, I usually finish books for the most part. I don't have DNS very often. It takes a lot for me to put a book down and just not want to continue reading it. But I had one of those this month, and that was Fairy Tale by Raymond Feist. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. So this is one that I just bought on impulse a couple months ago at a used bookstore. I thought the cover art was kind of cool, and I looked it up on Goodreads, and this book actually has some decent reviews, and a friend of mine on there that I follow, and usually I agree with a lot of his reviews, he even liked this book, so I thought I'd give it a try. This is like a dark fantasy mixed with horror, something a little bit different. But I could not get into this book at all. I think I stopped reading it around the 100-page mark, give or take a few pages. And I don't even know what the plot of this book is, to be honest. The first 100 pages is just this family moving into this new house, and it's like out in the country, kind of isolated, and they meet up with these neighbors of theirs and become friends with the people of this small town, and they're just talking. It's pretty much all that happens. I think what really turned me off from this book is the really long stretches of dialogue in here where nothing is happening in between. And I mean that quite literally. There were like 2 or 3 pages, or at least it seemed like it, of just solid nonstop dialogue with not even gestures or actions or anything thrown in there, just characters talking nonstop. And it got to the point where I don't even know what the hell they were talking about. I was just kind of losing interest in this book because, yeah, it was extremely boring. The writing, I don't want to say the writing was terrible, but it wasn't great either. I don't know where the story was going. I just was bored with listening to or reading the characters constantly talking. Yeah, I don't know. I could not get into this book at all, so I just decided to put it down. There was a little bit of fantasy, like action stuff going on at close to the point where I stopped reading, but I just didn't care to continue with it. Excuse me. So yeah, Fairy Tale by Raymond E. Feist was my one DNF for this month, and this might actually have been my only DNF so far this year. I don't know for sure, but I think this might be. But yeah, I could not get into this book at all, so that's why it's at the bottom of this list. All right, next up we have a book that I did manage to finish, but this book is just as terrible, and that is Dark Moon Rising by James Thompson. And this one I kind of bought on impulse a little bit too. I got this one more recently from a used bookstore. And I bought it because it looks like a werewolf novel, right? The title and the cover art both implies that it's a werewolf book. And as you guys know, I love werewolves. Any book that promises a werewolf story, I'm going to pick it up. But I didn't necessarily have high hopes or expectations for this book, but I was hoping for it to be at least somewhat entertaining. And it's really not. So this isn't even really a horror novel, to be honest. This is like a weird political drama combined with an erotica is the best way I know how to describe it. So it says it's even a horror on the spine there, pinnacle horror. But the only thing horrifying about this book is how bad it is. So the main character, Jim, is a neurosurgeon, and he discovers that he has a brain tumor himself. And so he comes into contact with this more advanced neurosurgeon guy, this doctor, who happens to be working for like this corrupt government agency that's conducting these illegal experiments where they take like the DNA cells or whatever of animals and inject them into people's brains. And they are using this experiment on soldiers and Marines and these tough guys. They're basically trying to create like this super army of people. And what happens when he injects these cells into them is these patients gain the strength of these particular animals they're extracting these cells from. For example, they're using like gorillas and wolves and just these different animals, and these people are getting these, enhanced senses, super strength, super smell, super vision, all this stuff. So it's got a little bit of like a science fiction element to it there, and it sounds like it'll be at least entertaining enough to be kind of just cheesy fun, something to not take too seriously, I was kind of looking forward to maybe getting some action and seeing these super soldiers or whatever they're called, like battle it out. And we do get a little bit of that, but it's not very much. Most of the story focuses on this weird political drama going on between this illegal or corrupt government agency or whatever, and these other senators and politicians that are trying to expose this illegal activity going on, and it's how unethical it is and all of this stuff. And then there's also this romance subplot. Actually, there's 2 romance subplots in here. One of them is completely unnecessary to the story. It has to do between the main villain and this girl that's kind of like betraying him. She's spying on him and like leaking his files and documents, trying to help the good guy politicians expose him and stuff. And we get a lot of intimate scenes with them that are completely unnecessary. And then we also got the romance subplot between the main character and this co-worker of his, this female doctor. They just fall in love like immediately. There's no reason for any of it. They like barely knew each other, and all of a sudden they're being just extremely flirtatious with each other, and there's just a lot of really, really corny dialogue between them that I was not believing for a second. I was actually laughing at how ridiculous the dialogue was between them, and just the dialogue in general in this book is really bad. This reads like a really low grade, like C grade sci-fi, I don't know, adult action horror movie. I'm not really sure. So but for some reason, I did decide to stick with it and just plow through it. I think part of it is I was getting a little bit of guilty pleasure with just silently criticizing this book for how bad it was, and just kind of laughing at it for just how atrocious the writing is, and how flat the characters are. And yeah, I don't know. And then towards the end, we did get a little bit of action where these super soldiers are battling it out, but it was very rushed, and he didn't spend very much time in detail on that. He spent more time in detail on the stuff that did not matter for the story, that did not progress the plot or anything. So this was not a good book at all. I'm giving this book a 1 out of 5 stars. And even though I managed to finish it, I do not recommend this book to anybody. So yeah, that's my review for Dark Moon Rising by James Thompson. Avoid this book at all costs. It is horrible. Next up we have... Do I have these in the right order? Okay. Yeah, I do. A couple of these books I wasn't sure how I wanted to order them. We'll just go with this though. The next book is Richard Lehman's Dark Mountain, and I have an individual review up for this book as well, so I'm not going to go too in depth on it here, but this book I really liked starting out. The previous 2 Richard Lehman novels that I read, In the Dark and Funland, I did not really care for those much at all. This one, I loved the first half of this book. Even if it was a little bit slow and uneventful, I just really liked Lehman's writing style, his description of the forest, and he created this really like atmospheric feeling. It was very creepy. I really liked the dialogue between the characters. I think he did a really good job with that. Surprisingly good compared to his other 2 books of just utilizing the dialogue to create these believable characters. It was very amusing watching all of these different characters interact, and it felt very believable. I love the setting of the woods and the creepy implications of the 2 villainous characters living in the woods, this old witch and her son. And I really liked it starting out and thought this was finally going to be a Lehman novel that I really loved. Unfortunately, this one just took a crap in the second half. The story completely switched directions as they left the forest, and it turned into like a weird drama instead of a horror, and it was just really disappointing. This was a letdown. I ended up giving this book like a 2.5 out of 5 stars. So again, this is probably my favorite Lehman novel that I've read so far, but I would still ended up being more disappointed with it than anything. But yeah, that's Dark Mountain by Richard Lehman. Next up, we have an R.L. Stine book. This is one of his older YA thrillers, and that is I Saw You That Night. On the back, there's a little blurb here that says, this summer is going to be a real killer. So, this one was just okay. As you guys know, R.L. Stine is my favorite author. I still haven't read a ton of his YA thrillers and standalone novels aside from the Goosebumps series and Fear Street series, but this one definitely is not one of my favorites. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. So basically in this one, Roxy makes a bet with her friend. There's this new handsome guy that's going to school, and they make a bet as to who can go out on a date with him first, and then for proof that they go out on a date with him, they have to get this guy to give them his hat. So for some reason, Roxy decides to break into this guy's house to get his hat so she can win the bet, because she knows her friend is better looking than she is, and she's probably going to win. So she decides to break into his house. Already, you kind of have to suspend your disbelief a little bit and just kind of go along for the ride. It's kind of ridiculous, but... So when she breaks into his house, she discovers that someone is already in there. And of course, she assumes that it's this guy. I already forget his name, but she assumes it's him. And she hears them arguing with another girl. And then she hears fighting going on, and they're like screaming at each other, and she hears some other noises that imply one of them killed the other. And she runs out of the house, and the next day or a couple days after that or something, this guy comes up to her and says, "Roxy, I saw you. I know what you did." Something along those lines. And from there, it's just kind of her like trying to figure out exactly what's going on, like what happened. She assumes it's this guy that murdered his girlfriend or something. And I don't know. I don't even remember a lot of this book already because it was really cheesy. A lot of these books are cheesy. Usually it's in a good kind of way. But this one I did not really care for all that much, to be honest. The characters in here are not the brightest. You just really have to suspend your disbelief with this one. A little bit too much for my tastes. And it just was not one of R.L. Stine's best. It's not terrible. I still had some fun with it. But yeah, I don't know. I would only recommend this one to the bigger R.L. Stine fans such as myself. I think I give this book like a 2.5 out of 5 stars as well. I think I put this one above Dark Mountain because overall I feel like it's a little bit more solid and the story stays more focused, whereas Dark Mountain was kind of all over the place with a really solid first half and then just kind of completely fell apart. So I think that's why I put this one above that book. But in the beginning, I was enjoying Dark Mountain a lot more than I was this one. So yeah, anyway, that's R.L. Stine's I Saw You That Night. Next up, we have something very different. I don't read too much nonfiction. I do once in a while to switch things up. But I have here Charlie Daniels' autobiography, Never Look at the Empty Seats, a memoir. So I'm not the biggest Charlie Daniels fan in the world. I'm really not a fan at all of like country type music or southern music at all, to be honest. But I've always appreciated some of his music. I like some more of his hit singles. The Devil Went Down to Georgia is a classic. I will always love that song, even though I've heard it a million times. And I like some of his other songs, such as Still in Saigon and The Legend of Woolly Swamp. And he just has a lot of classics. And he seems like a pretty cool guy, pretty humble person. And I don't know, I bought this a while ago and was just kind of curious about it and decided to give it a read. So I enjoyed this book for the most part. It's basically just him talking about his life and his music career. And he has lots of funny stories to share about his personal life. He talks about a time he went down to Mexico and got drunk and ended up in jail and just all kinds of crazy stuff that happened. He shares a lot of personal details of his life and his loved ones and family and things like that. But the primary focus of this book is him talking about his music career and the very beginnings of the Charlie Daniels Band and the rise of their career, and just talking about all the different tours and the business side of things and all of that stuff. I did kind of get bored in here at some points, and I think that was because that was the main focus of this book, is the whole music side of things. And he talks a lot about like the business side of his band and all the different members they went through and they had to fire and all of this just different stuff. And it got a little bit boring and tedious. And I get it. Music is obviously the biggest part of his life, or it was the biggest part of his life. So he's going to spend the most time talking about that naturally. But I don't know. It just got a little bit too tedious at times, and I wished he would have focused more on the funnier like stories he had to share, the more personal stuff, and I don't know. But yeah, those are my thoughts on this one. I'm not going to really rate this one. It's kind of hard to compare a nonfiction book to all of these other fiction novels that I'm reading. But I don't know. If I had to rate it, I would probably give it like a 3 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it or anything. It was an interesting read. I don't regret reading it at all, but it's probably not a book I will read again. So yeah, Charlie Daniels, Never Look at the Empty Seats. All right, we're starting to get to the better books now. This one is The Pearl by John Steinbeck. This is my first time reading a John Steinbeck novel. I know he's considered like one of the classics, one of the greatest authors. He's got Of Mice and Men, I believe, and The Grapes of Wrath, and I've always wanted to read those novels. I just haven't gotten around to it. But this is a shorter one, The Pearl. This is only like 150 pages, I think. Not even. Like 120 pages. And I actually saw this at a free book rack at the library where they just had a few random books on there, and this was one of them, and I just decided to grab it. So this book is about these indigenous people that are they're very poor, and their son is stung by a scorpion, excuse me. And excuse me guys, I'm starting to get a little tired here and losing my train of thought already. Basically what happens is their son gets sick from this venom, and they take him to the doctor, and the doctor won't treat their son because he wants money. He's like this rich jerk. I guess he, along with all of these other people, live in like this rich society where they kind of frown upon these indigenous people. And so what happens is the father goes out and finds this pearl in the ocean and is going to sell it and have the money to heal his son and everything. And from there, it just kind of, these people try to take the pearl away from him, and there's a lot of fighting going on, and he wants to keep it. And this story is basically, I'm just going to kind of sum this up here because I'm struggling to remember everything I wanted to say about it. But this story is basically a message about like greed and poverty and the more important things in life, such as family and cherishing what you already have instead of being greedy. That's basically the message of this book. And it was okay. I enjoyed it. I feel like it didn't fully resonate with me. I didn't really fall in love with it. The writing was definitely very good in it. I can see how John Steinbeck is as popular and well known about as he is. It definitely has a little bit of like a fancy prose to it, and the writing in it was really good. Some of the details and stuff in here were a little bit repetitive for my tastes. He uses a lot of the same metaphors to the point where it just kind of becomes repetitive, and I don't know. It was just okay. I appreciated it. I liked the message and everything behind it. There's definitely a lot of depth to this story, even for being as short as it is. I just didn't quite fall in love with it or anything, so I think I give this one like a 3 out of 5 stars. Maybe a 3.5 if I'm feeling generous, but I don't know, probably like a 3 out of 5. But it was okay. I would still like to check out some of John Steinbeck's other work in the future, but I wasn't entirely satisfied with this one. Next up, we have another R.L. Stine book, and this one I liked much more than the previous one. Obviously, it's higher on the list, and that is Beach House, and this is part of the Point Horror series. And I was surprised by this one. I had a lot of fun with this book. This is probably one of my favorite R.L. Stine young adult thrillers that I've read so far. And in this one, what happens is we follow this group of teenagers in the 50s, and then we also follow this group of teenagers in the present time, well, in the 1990s. And what happens is that every few chapters or so, we switch back and forth between the groups of teenagers, and they're slowly getting picked off one by one by this mysterious killer. So it's got this really interesting mystery aspect to it as we're trying to figure out what's going on. And this book really surprised me for not just how compelling this mystery was and how suspenseful it was, but there's also a lot of humor in here, and it really worked. I was really impressed by this book. A lot of the humor in this book is very subtle. Some of it is intentional, some of it isn't. This book, along with pretty much every R.L. Stine book, is a little bit cheesy. This one was cheesy in the good kind of way, though. There was just a lot of stuff in here that was just kind of corny and very like 90s and stuff that, you know, just hasn't dated well, but it kind of excuse me guys, I'm running out of steam here. It kind of added to like the charm of this book is what I'm trying to say. I really had a good time with this book. It had humor in it, had suspense to it. I really liked how things kind of wrapped up on the ending. There were a couple aspects of the ending that didn't work as well for me. I didn't necessarily think the explanation tied everything up. There was a couple of loose ends by the time we reached the climax of the book, but I can't bash this book too much for that because that's kind of a common theme with these books. They're not all perfect, like coherent stories. It seems like there's always one or two little logical threads that are just kind of left hanging by the end. But I would really recommend this book for someone looking to get into R.L. Stine more. This one is a slightly longer too than most of his standalone young adult books. This one is just over 200 pages, whereas This one and most of them are around like the 140 to 160 page mark. So this one was a little bit longer. I will say it was a little bit confusing at times, following these two groups of teenagers and trying to keep up with all these characters. I think there was like 4 or 5 teenagers from each group as we go back and forth from the 1950s to the 90s. So it was a little bit confusing at times trying to keep up with all these characters and remembering who was who. But it also kind of added to the mystery aspect of it. And I did not exactly predict what was going to happen. I was a little bit confused in the good kind of way. I was kind of scratching my head a little bit. A lot of R.L. Stine books, I can predict what's going to happen. This one, I did not predict at all. So, yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. I really enjoyed Beach House. I give this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And yeah, I recommend checking this one out. This was a fun book. It had lots of humor in it, and the suspense was good. I don't really have any major complaints with this book. It just wasn't amazing or anything like that. So yeah. All right, and the last book I read this month is actually one I started at the end of June and finished very early this month. I believe it was either the 1st or the 2nd of July. I can't remember for sure. And this is my favorite book that I read this month, and that is Nick Cutter's The Troop. Now, I give this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars as well, but the more I think about it, I might be able to round this one up to a 4 stars, honestly. It'd be kind of a low 4-star rating, but I think I could probably give this like a 4-star rating. This book really stuck with me even after I read it. This one is terrifying, disturbing. This is one of the most disgusting books that I've ever read, but in a good way. So I'm not going to go too much in depth with this book because I have an individual review up for this one as well if you guys want to go check that out. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. There were some things about it that didn't really work for me. The story felt a little bit directionless at times. The middle of the book particularly, I was kind of getting not necessarily bored, but it just didn't really feel like there was a lot happening. Almost felt a little bit meandering. And I just felt like it could have used something a little bit extra. And then a lot of the detail and description I felt was kind of off-putting. He used too much detail in some places with lots of weird similes and things like that that didn't really work for me. And then in other areas, I felt like it was a little bit too vague. I feel like we could have used some more description of the surrounding island and the nature that these kids were trapped in. But overall, I had a good time with this book. It was surprising how much this book got under my skin. This one really creeped me out. This book is about a parasitic infection, and these parasites in here are just atrocious, just nauseating. I kind of lost my appetite after reading this book. So, yeah, I don't know. This was a good book. I recommend this to fans of horror that can stomach the more extreme side of things or are looking for a good scare. This was a pretty well-written book, and the complaints I have against it are pretty minor for the most part. So I think that's why I'm going to round it up to like a 4 stars out of 5. But yeah, that's Nick Cutter's The Troop. This was a good book, guys. Definitely my favorite book of this month. Even though I technically started it at the end of June, I'm still counting it for this month. But this was definitely my favorite book. Just above R.L. Stine's The Beach House. But yeah, that's pretty much everything I read this month, guys. This video I feel like is probably really long, so I'm just going to cut it here. Let me know your guys' thoughts on these books if you've read any of them. Let me know what books you read this month. Do you have anything you read this month that you might recommend to me? Let me know down in the comments. But anyways, guys, that's about all. Thanks for watching and have a great day.